The silence of the biosafety level 4 laboratory was not truly silent. It was a symphony of synthesized air. The rhythmic thrum of the HVAC systems, the low-frequency hum of the negative pressure generators, and the sporadic mechanical whir of the centrifuges created a soundscape that Dr. Elias Thorne had come to associate with safety, but tonight, at 2:14 a.m., it sounded like a funeral dirge. The lab, buried deep beneath the concrete shell of the CDC headquarters in Atlanta, felt less like a bastion of science and more like a crypt. Elias sat hunched over the primary terminal, the blue light of the monitors carving deep shadows into his exhausted face, reflecting off the lenses of his wire-rimmed glasses. His eyes were burning, a dry, gritty sensation that no amount of blinking could alleviate, a testament to the 70-hour workweek he was currently surviving on caffeine and sheer, stubborn willpower. On the desk beside him, a cup of coffee had long since gone cold, a stagnant pool of black liquid that he ignored in favor of the data cascading down the screen in front of him. He was the only soul left in Sector 7. The rest of the team, the junior analysts, the biostatisticians, and the endless parade of interns had clocked out hours ago, leaving to return to their families, their warm beds, and their ignorance. Elias envied them. He envied their ability to trust the process, to look at a stamp of approval from the FDA and believe that the work was done. But Elias couldn't leave. Not yet. The rollout for Vax-Z was scheduled for Monday morning. It was being hailed as the miracle of the decade, a pharmaceutical triumph by Ethelgard Industries that promised to eradicate the new strain of influenza that had been hospitalizing children across the Midwest at alarming rates. The president was scheduled to give a press conference. The stocks were soaring. The champagne was already on ice in boardrooms from New York to Geneva. But Elias Thorne was a man who didn't believe in miracles. He believed in mathematics, and the math on the protein folding structure of the Vax-Z antigen wasn't sitting right in his gut. It wasn't a glaring error. If it were, the automated systems or the initial peer reviews would have caught it months ago. It was something subtler, a ghost in the machine, a minute discrepancy in the tertiary structure of the spike protein that appeared only under specific thermal stress simulations. He had spent the last 6 hours running the Ghost Child protocol, a high-fidelity simulation designed to mimic the physiological environment of a pediatric cardiovascular system. It was a test rarely used for flu vaccines, usually reserved for high-risk gene therapies, but Elias had pushed the authorization through on his own credentials, driven by a nagging paranoia that he couldn't articulate. He tapped the Enter key, executing the final render of the protein interaction. The screen flickered, replacing the raw code with a 3D rotating model of the Vax-Z molecule binding to a human cell receptor. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, a complex dance of atoms and bonds. Elias leaned in, his breath fogging the air in the temperature-controlled room. "Come on," he whispered to the empty room, his voice raspy. "Show me I'm wrong. Please, just tell me I'm a paranoid old man who needs sleep." The simulation began to run. He watched as the vaccine's lipid nanoparticles delivered the mRNA payload. The cell accepted it. The instruction was read. The spike protein was produced to train the immune system. Everything looked textbook perfect. The T-cells responded, the antibodies formed. It was a flawless immune response. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding, his shoulders sagging with relief. He reached for the cold coffee, ready to take a sip and finally go home to his empty apartment. Then the anomaly occurred. It happened at the molecular level so fast that if he had blinked, he would have missed it. But the simulation was running in slow motion, frame by frame. On the screen, a cluster of the synthesized spike proteins didn't dissolve after the immune response as they were designed to. Instead, they began to aggregate. They drifted, driven by an unforeseen electrostatic attraction, toward the endothelial lining of the heart tissue in the simulation. Elias froze, the cup of coffee halting halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly, his hand trembling slightly. "No," he muttered. "That's impossible. The half-life is supposed to be 12 hours. You should be breaking down." He typed furiously, isolating the aggregation event. He zoomed in on the molecular bonds. There it was. A tiny, jagged variance in the amino acid sequence at position 412. It wasn't a random mutation. It was a structural flaw in the synthetic bridge that held the protein together. Under the specific pH balance of a child's blood, which was slightly more alkaline than an adult's, the bridge didn't dissolve. It hardened. The proteins weren't clearing the system. They were crystallizing. Elias felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck, prickling his skin. He expanded the simulation parameters, commanding the computer to project the outcome over a 48-hour period. The processing bar crawled across the bottom of the screen, agonizingly slow. The hum of the servers seemed to grow louder, filling the room with a sense of impending doom. While he waited, his mind raced back to the safety data Ethelgard had submitted. Thousands of pages of trials. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. He had read the summaries. They claimed 0 serious adverse events. How could they have missed this? Unless they didn't test on a large enough sample size of children with specific metabolic markers? Or worse, unless they had seen it and buried it in the noise of statistical anomalies. The computer chirped, a cheerful sound that contrasted violently with the horror on the display. The simulation was complete. The screen was awash in red. The crystallized proteins had embedded themselves in the myocardium, the heart muscle. The simulation showed massive inflammation, a cytokine storm localized entirely within the heart. The virtual subject, a digital representation of a 7-year-old boy, went into cardiac arrest within 72 hours of administration. Elias stared at the fatality probability index in the bottom right corner. It blinked a single, devastating number, 3. He did the math instantly. It was a reflex. 50 million doses were ready to be shipped. 50 million children. 3.4%. That wasn't a side effect. That was a massacre. 1.7 million children at risk of severe heart failure. Hundreds of thousands of potential deaths. Elias pushed his chair back, the wheels screeching against the linoleum floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet lab. He stood up, pacing the small space between his desk and the biohood. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that mirrored the panic rising in his throat. He felt nauseous. This wasn't just a failed experiment. This was the black swan event every virologist had nightmares about. The cure that kills. It's a mistake, he said aloud, trying to convince the walls. It's a coding error in the simulation. He sat back down, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He pulled up the raw data files from Ethelgard's internal server, files he had only gained access to through a decryption key a friend in the FDA's IT department had shared with him off the record. A breach of protocol that could land him in federal prison. He cross-referenced the raw mass spectrometry data from the manufacturer's Lot 412 against his simulation. The spectral peaks matched perfectly. The variance was real. It was in the vial. It was in every vial. He grabbed the nearest landline phone, his hand shaking so badly he misdialed the first time. He needed to call the director. He needed to call the FDA. He needed to stop the trucks that were likely already idling at the distribution centers. He dialed the internal emergency line for Director Vance. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Click. This is the voicemail of Director Richard Vance. Please leave a message. Elias slammed the receiver down. Of course. It was 2:30 a.m. on a Saturday. Vance was likely asleep in his Georgetown townhouse, dreaming of his promotion. Elias grabbed his personal cell phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Sarah's number. But his thumb hovered over the call button. Sarah was a journalist. If he called her, there was no going back. It would be a leak. It would be treason. He needed to try the chain of command one last time. He needed to secure the physical evidence first. He looked across the lab to the cryogenic storage unit. Inside, sitting in a rack of liquid nitrogen, were the verification samples sent by Ethelgard. He needed sample 412. He needed to run a physical assay to confirm the digital model. If he could prove the crystallization happened in a petri dish, no one could deny it. He moved toward the storage unit, his footsteps heavy. He swiped his badge, and the heavy steel door hissed open, releasing a cloud of white vapor that swirled around his ankles like a ghost. He reached in with gloved hands, his breath hitching as he located the vial. It looked so innocent, Just a clear liquid in a glass tube, capped with a gray stopper. He held death in the palm of his hand. As he turned back to his station, clutching the vial, a sudden sound froze him in his tracks. It wasn't the hum of the machines. It was the distinct pneumatic whoosh of the main laboratory airlock cycling open. Elias spun around, hiding the vial behind his back instinctively. The heavy doors at the far end of the lab slid apart. Standing there, framed by the harsh fluorescent light of the corridor, was a figure. It wasn't security. It wasn't the cleaning crew. It was Director Vance. He was wearing a trench coat over his pajamas, his hair unkempt, his face pale and unreadable. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were two men in dark suits that Elias didn't recognize. Men who stood with the rigid posture of military or private security, their hands clasped in front of them, eyes scanning the room with predatory efficiency. "Elias," Vance said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. It didn't echo. It seemed to cut through the air, sharp and precise. "The security system alerted me to an unauthorized decryption attempt on the Ethelgard server from this terminal." Elias felt his throat close up. He gripped the cold vial behind his back so tight he thought it might shatter. "Director," he managed to say, his voice sounding thin and foreign to his own ears. I found something. You need to look at this. The data, the variance in the protein structure." Vance didn't move. He didn't look at the screen where the red warning of the 3% fatality rate was still flashing. He looked directly at Elias, his eyes devoid of surprise. There was only a weary resignation in them, the look of a man who had already weighed the cost of a human soul and paid the bill. "I know what you found, Elias," Vance said softly, stepping into the room. The two men behind him moved forward in unison, their footsteps silent on the floor. "We've known about the variance for 3 months." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Elias took a step back, hitting the edge of the lab bench. You knew? "It's a statistical outlier," Vance said, dismissing the massacre with a wave of his hand. "The efficacy against the virus is 99%. Do you know what happens if we don't release this vaccine, Elias? The economy stalls. Fear takes over. The administration cannot afford another panic. Kills children." Elias screamed, the anger finally breaking through the fear. He whipped his hand out, revealing the vial, pointing it at Vance like a weapon. "Causes heart failure. I ran the simulation. 3% mortality. That's not an outlier, Richard. That's a genocide." Vance stopped. He looked at the vial in Elias's hand, then up at Elias's face. The mask of calm slipped for a second, revealing a flash of irritation. "Put the sample back, Elias. Delete the simulation. Go home. We can discuss a transfer in the morning. Maybe a nice research post in Europe." "You're insane," Elias whispered, backing away toward the emergency exit at the rear of the lab. "I'm not deleting anything. I'm calling the FDA. I'm calling the press." Vance sighed, a long, tired sound. He nodded slightly to the men behind him. "I was afraid you'd say that," Vance said. "Secure the sample. Clean the server." The two men moved. They didn't walk. They lunged. They were fast, professionally fast. Elias didn't think. Instinct, primal and desperate, took over. He threw the rolling lab chair into the path of the first man and bolted for the rear door. "He has the sample," Vance shouted, his voice losing its composure. "Don't let him leave the building with that vial." Elias hit the crash bar of the emergency exit. The alarm shrieked, a piercing, strobing red light that plunged the world into chaos. He stumbled into the service corridor, the cold vial burning his hand, the sound of heavy boots pounding the floor behind him. He wasn't a scientist anymore. He was prey. The service corridor was a throat of raw concrete and exposed piping, a stark contrast to the sterile, gleaming white laboratory Elias had just fled. The air here smelled of dust and hydraulic fluid, and the emergency klaxons were deafening, a pulsating shriek that seemed to vibrate inside his skull. Elias didn't run with the grace of an athlete. He ran with the desperate, stumbling gait of a man who had spent the last 20 years behind a desk. His loafers slipped on the polished concrete, and his breath tore at his lungs, ragged and hot. In his right hand, the vial sample 412 was gripped so tightly his fingers had gone numb. A fragile glass vessel containing the potential salvation of millions or the damnation of his entire life's work. He careened around a corner, his shoulder slamming into a junction box, the pain sharp and immediate, but he didn't slow down. Behind him, the heavy thud of military-grade boots echoed against the walls, growing louder, a rhythmic drumbeat of impending violence. Vance's men. They weren't CDC security. CDC security wore polyester uniforms and carried tasers. These men moved with the kinetic efficiency of predators, their silence in the chaos speaking volumes about their intent. They were fixers, corporate cleaners sent to scrub a stain, and Elias Thorne had just become the stain. He reached the heavy steel door of the freight elevator bank and slammed his palm against the call button, mashing it repeatedly. The light remained dark, of course. Vance had initiated a level 5 lockdown. The elevators were grounded. The stairwell. He had to get to the stairwell. Elias pushed off the wall, his legs burning with lactic acid, and sprinted toward the glowing green exit sign at the end of the hall. The red emergency strobes turned the corridor into a disorienting nightmare of shadows and light, distorting his depth perception. Every shadow looked like a gunman. Every steam pipe hissing sounded like a suppressor firing. He burst through the stairwell door, the heavy metal bar clanging loudly, giving away his position. He didn't care. He threw himself onto the landing, grabbing the railing and hauling himself down the stairs 3 at a time. He was on the 4th sublevel. The parking garage was on the 1st. 3 flights. Just 3 flights. Above him, the door he had just passed through burst open. "Target is in the north stairwell." A voice echoed down the concrete shaft. It was mechanical, filtered through a tactical radio. "Authorization to engage. Clear to engage. Contain the asset. Eliminate the carrier. Eliminate." The word hung in the air, cold and final. Elias froze for a fraction of a second, the reality of his situation crystallizing like the proteins in the deadly vaccine. This wasn't a disciplinary action. This wasn't an arrest. This was an execution. He scrambled faster, his foot catching on a step, sending him sprawling forward. He tucked his body instinctively, curling around the hand holding the vial, taking the impact on his shoulder and hip. He slid down half a flight of stairs, the concrete biting into his skin through his dress shirt. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the bruising ache in his ribs. A bullet sparked against the metal railing inches from his head, the clang ringing out like a bell. Concrete dust sprayed into his eyes. He didn't look back. He vaulted down the next landing, using the momentum to swing around the corner. Level 2. The door to the 2nd floor swung open just as Elias reached the landing. A security guard, Paul, a man Elias had shared coffee with in the break room for 5 years, stepped out, eyes wide, hand hovering over his holstered pistol. Paul looked confused, terrified by the alarms and the gunfire. "Dr. Thorne," Paul stammered, raising his hands. "What the hell is going on? Control says there's a bio breach." "Paul, run," Elias screamed, not stopping. "Get out of the way. Doc, you need to stop." Paul stepped into his path, trying to be the hero, trying to follow the protocol he barely understood. From the darkness of the stairs above, 2 suppressed shots coughed thwip, thwip. Paul's chest erupted in red. He didn't even scream. The look of confusion on his face didn't have time to shift to pain before he crumpled backward, sliding down the wall, leaving a dark smear on the gray paint. Elias gasped, a sound of pure horror that got stuck in his throat. He had just killed Paul. No, Vance had killed Paul. Ethelgard had killed Paul. The distinction didn't matter to the dead man on the floor. Tears blurred Elias's vision, but the adrenaline surged, turning the grief into a cold, hard knot of survival instinct. He leaped over Paul's body, his shoes skidding in the spreading pool of blood, and crashed through the door to level 1, the parking garage. The humidity hit him first. It was raining outside, a torrential downpour that had turned the air in the underground garage heavy and damp. The space was cavernous, filled with shadows and the silent shapes of parked cars. The emergency lights here were dim, casting long, skeletal shadows across the concrete pillars. Elias crouched behind a concrete column, his chest heaving, trying to quiet his breathing. He checked the vial. Intact. He checked his pocket for his car keys. His hand was shaking so badly he almost dropped them. He peered around the pillar. His car, a nondescript black sedan, was parked in row C, about 50 yards away. Between him and the car lay an expanse of open concrete. It was a kill zone. The door to the stairwell opened slowly behind him. The mercenaries were here. They wouldn't rush now. They would sweep the room. They knew he was trapped. The exit gates would be locked down. Elias looked up at the ceiling. The fire suppression system. It was desperate, it was reckless, and it was the only card he had left to play. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a standard butane lighter, a habit he had supposedly quit 10 years ago but kept for stress. He looked at the heat sensor on the pillar above him. It was too high. He scanned the floor. A trash can overflowed with paper towels near the elevator lobby. He grabbed a handful of oily rags from a maintenance cart parked nearby, stuffed them into the bin, and flicked the lighter. The flame caught instantly. He waited, seconds ticking by like hours, until the fire licked upward, black smoke curling toward the sensor. "Fan out!" The voice whispered from the darkness. "Check the rows." The sensor triggered. With a thunderous crack, the sprinkler system exploded into life. Gallons of water, mixed with fire-retardant foam, rained down from the ceiling. The garage instantly turned into a chaotic storm of white noise and cascading water. Visibility dropped to 0. Cover. Visuals lost. Elias moved. He stayed low, using the line of parked cars as cover, splashing through the rising water on the floor. He didn't look for the gunmen. He looked for the reflection of their tactical flashlights in the puddles. He saw a beam sweep over the hood of a silver Toyota to his left. He moved right. He reached his sedan. Fumbling with the keys, he unlocked the door manually, afraid the electronic chirp would give him away. He slipped into the driver's seat, the leather cold against his soaked back. He didn't start the engine immediately. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a ruggedized laptop. He had the physical sample, but the sample wasn't enough. Could be dismissed as contaminated or planted. He needed the data, the simulation logs, the raw files he had decrypted in the lab. He hadn't been able to grab the drive, but his terminal was still mirrored to his private cloud. A failsafe he had set up months ago when he first started suspecting the anomalies. It was a breach of every security protocol in the book, a fireable offense, and now it was his lifeline. He tethered the laptop to his phone's encrypted hotspot. The connection was weak in the underground bunker. 1 bar. "Come on!" he hissed, water dripping from his hair onto the keyboard. He initiated the transfer command. The files on his lab terminal, the ones Vance thought he was scrubbing, began to copy to the remote server. A flashlight beam cut through the rear windshield, illuminating the interior of the car. Row C. Vehicle located. Elias threw the laptop onto the passenger seat. He jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life, the sound echoing like a beast waking up in a cave. Bullets shattered the rear window, showering the back seat with tempered glass. Elias ducked, shifting the gear into reverse. He stomped on the gas. The car shot backward, slamming into the shins of the mercenary approaching the trunk. A sickening crunch, a scream, and the man was thrown over the roof. Elias spun the wheel, shifting into drive. Tires squealed, finding traction on the wet, foamy concrete. He accelerated toward the exit ramp. 2 more figures stepped out from behind the pillars near the exit, raising assault rifles. Elias didn't brake. He ducked below the dashboard, steering by memory and the glimpse of the exit sign he had seen seconds ago. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat. The windshield spiderwebbed. The side mirror exploded. The car shuddered as rounds punched into the grille and the passenger door. Elias kept his foot pinned to the floor. The engine whined in protest. He hit the mercenary, blocking the ramp with the front bumper, a glancing blow that sent the man spinning into the wall, his weapon clattering away. The car fishtailed, scraping against the concrete barrier, sparks flying in a shower of orange against the gloom. The exit gate was ahead, a heavy iron bar meant to stop unauthorized vehicles. "Brace," Elias whispered. He hit the gate at 40 miles per hour. The metal groaned and buckled, snapping off its hinges with a violence that threw Elias forward against his seatbelt. The airbags didn't deploy. He had disabled the sensors years ago after a fender bender, a procrastination that saved his life now as he needed to see. The sedan burst out of the underground garage and into the night. The storm outside was biblical. Rain lashed down in sheets, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon. The wind howled, shaking the damaged car. Elias checked the rearview mirror. The backup lights of the SUVs were already visible emerging from the garage mouth, their sirens wailing, red and blue lights cutting through the rain. He was out of the building, but he wasn't out of the trap. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The file transfer was paused. Connection lost. Damn it! Elias slammed his hand on the steering wheel. He had the sample, but he only had fragments of the data. He needed a stable connection. He needed Sarah. He grabbed the phone and dialed. It rang once, twice. "Elias." Sarah's voice was thick with sleep, confused. "It's 4 in the morning. Why are you?" "Listen to me," Elias shouted, his voice cracking. He swerved to avoid a taxi, running a red light. "I'm in the car. I'm out. But they're behind me. Ethelgard. Vance. They killed Paul. They're killing everyone." "What? Who killed Paul?" "Elias, slow down, you're not making sense. The vaccine is poison, Sarah. The Vax-Z. It kills the kids. I have the sample. I have the proof in the car. But I can't stop. They'll run me off the road." "Where are you?" Sarah's voice shifted instantly. The sleep vanished. The journalist took over. "I'm on 14th, heading toward the mall. I can't go to the safe house. They know my plates. They know everything." Okay. Breathe. "I'm at the studio." "No, that's too exposed." There was a pause, the sound of rustling sheets and keys jingling. "The old subway line. The unfinished station on 4th. The access tunnel is still open for construction. I used it for that story on the homeless shelters last year. Can you make it there?" "The subway," Elias repeated, his eyes darting to the mirror. The SUVs were gaining. They were heavier, faster in the rain. One of them rammed his bumper, sending a jolt through his spine. "I can make it, but Elias, I might not be alone when I get there." "Just get there," Sarah commanded. "I'm grabbing my gear. I'm bringing the uplink. We'll broadcast it live. If they want to kill you, they'll have to do it in front of the whole damn world." "Sarah." Elias's voice softened for a second, the fear piercing through the adrenaline. "If I don't make it to the tunnel, the sample is in a silver canister. It looks like a thermos. Don't let them take it." "Shut up, Elias. You're making it." 4th Street. 10 minutes. The line went dead. Elias threw the phone onto the passenger seat next to the laptop and the canister. He gripped the wheel with both hands. The speedometer climbed past 80. The windshield was a kaleidoscope of cracks, barely held together by the laminate. He looked into the rearview mirror again. The lead SUV was pulling up alongside him, the window rolling down. A man leaned out, a submachine gun in his hands. Elias slammed on the brakes. The SUV shot past him, the gunman firing into the empty air where Elias's car had been a split second before. Elias spun the wheel hard to the left, clipping the rear bumper of the SUV, sending it into a spin across the wet highway. It slammed into the median divider in a shower of sparks. 1 down, 2 to go. He floored the accelerator again, the engine screaming as the tachometer redlined. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, the blood running into his eye, mixing with the sweat. He wiped it away with his sleeve. Ahead, the city skyline loomed like jagged teeth against the purple, storm-bruised sky. Somewhere in that concrete jungle was the tunnel. Somewhere was the truth. Elias Thorne, The man who spent his life looking at the world through a microscope drove into the darkness, knowing that for the first time in his life, the variable he couldn't predict was himself. The city of Washington, D.C. had dissolved into a blur of gray rain and streaking sodium lights, a wet oil painting smeared by the hand of a violent god. Elias Thorne gripped the steering wheel of his battered sedan, his knuckles white, the leather biting into his skin. The car was no longer just a vehicle. It was a dying animal, shuddering and wheezing with every revolution of the engine. The temperature gauge was burying itself in the red, steam hissing angrily from under the buckled hood where a bullet had likely nicked the radiator. But Elias couldn't stop. Stopping meant death, and not just his own. Behind him, the remaining black SUV was a relentless shadow, a mechanical shark cutting through the spray. It didn't try to ram him again immediately. The driver was skilled, waiting for the highway to narrow, waiting for the inevitable mistake. Elias checked the rearview mirror, currently hanging by a single wire, swinging hypnotically with the motion of the car. The headlights behind him were blinding, high beams reflected off the shattered spiderweb of his rear windshield, turning the interior of his sedan into a strobe-lit cage of fear. He swerved hard to the right, cutting across 3 lanes of traffic to take the exit ramp for 4th Street. Horns blared around him, long Doppler effect wails of indignation from late-night commuters who had no idea they were driving through a kill zone. The SUV followed effortlessly, its suspension absorbing the violent turn that nearly sent Elias's sedan spinning into the guardrail. "Think?" Elias whispered to himself, his voice raspy and dry despite the humidity. "You're not a stunt driver. You're a physicist. You're a biologist. Use the variables." He analyzed the road ahead. The exit ramp curved sharply downhill, a 6-degree gradient, slick with oil and rainwater. The friction coefficient was practically 0. The SUV was heavier, more mass, more momentum. If Elias braked, the SUV would crush him. If he accelerated, he risked hydroplaning into the concrete wall. He chose acceleration. He slammed his foot down. The sedan's tires screamed, losing traction for a heart-stopping second before biting into the asphalt. The rear end fishtailed, swinging wide toward the precipice of the ramp, but Elias steered into the skid, correcting with a precision born of pure, unadulterated terror. He shot down the ramp like a bullet. The SUV, heavier and top-heavy, had to tap its brakes to avoid rolling over. It bought him 3 seconds. Elias merged onto 4th Street. The landscape here was different, industrial, scarred by endless construction. The skeleton of the new transit line loomed overhead, steel girders rusting in the rain, surrounded by orange barricades and "keep out" signs. This was the rendezvous point, the unfinished subway station. But the SUV was back. The engine roared as it pulled up alongside him on the driver's side, forcing him toward the sidewalk. Elias looked over. The window of the SUV rolled down again. This time, he didn't see a gun. He saw the driver, a man with a shaved head and eyes that looked like dead pixels on a screen, yank the steering wheel hard to the right. Crunch. The impact was deafening. Metal screamed against metal. Elias's head slammed against the side window, stars bursting in his vision. The sedan was thrown sideways, mounting the curb, smashing through a row of plastic construction barrels that exploded like orange confetti. He fought the wheel, but the steering column was bent. The car was careening out of control, heading straight for the chain-link fence that surrounded the open excavation pit of the subway station. "Sarah," he gasped. He saw the fence coming. He saw the drop behind it. A steep, mud-slicked concrete ramp leading down into the gaping maw of the tunnel entrance. It was a 40-foot decline at a 45-degree angle. He had a split-second choice. Try to brake and get pinned against the fence by the mercenaries, where they would put a bullet in his head and take the sample. Or let go. Elias took his foot off the brake. He grabbed the silver canister on the passenger seat, hugging it to his chest with his left arm, and braced his right arm against the dashboard. "Physics," he muttered, squeezing his eyes shut. "Don't fail me now." The sedan hit the fence at 50 miles per hour. The chain link snapped with a sound like a whip crack. The car went airborne for a terrifying, weightless second, A moment of absolute silence where the rain seemed to pause before gravity reclaimed it. The nose of the car dipped, and they slammed onto the muddy ramp below. The world became a violent tumbler. The suspension collapsed instantly. The car bottomed out, sparks showering in a fountain of gold as the undercarriage ground against the concrete. They slid down the ramp, uncontrollable, a sled of steel and glass hurtling into the darkness of the earth. The windshield shattered completely, spraying Elias with diamonds of safety glass. The airbag finally deployed, a punch to the face that snapped his head back and filled the cabin with the acrid smell of chemical dust. The car spun 180 degrees, sliding backward now, deeper into the tunnel. It clipped a concrete pillar, tearing the driver's side door clean off, before coming to a grinding, shuddering halt against a pile of construction debris. Silence returned. Heavy, suffocating silence. For a long moment, there was no movement in the wreckage. Only the hiss of steam from the crushed engine and the drip, drip, drip of water leaking from the tunnel ceiling. Then a cough, a wet, hacking sound. Elias opened his eyes. The world was spinning. His vision was a blur of gray and black. He tried to move, and a scream of agony tore from his throat. His left leg was pinned under the crushed dashboard. He could feel the warm, sticky slide of blood running down his forehead, blinding his left eye. He looked down at his chest. The silver canister was still there, clutched in a death grip against his ribs. It was dented, scratched, but intact. The sample survived. "Move," he told himself. The command felt distant, like it was coming from someone else. "They're coming." He heard it then, the sound of tires screeching to a halt at the top of the ramp. Car doors slamming. Voices shouting orders. Beams of tactical flashlights cutting through the rain, sweeping down into the pit. Target vehicle neutralized. Check for survivors. Secure the asset. They were coming down on foot. Elias gritted his teeth. He grabbed the steering wheel with his free hand and pushed. 1, 2, 3. He yanked his leg free. The pain was blinding, white-hot, jagged lightning shooting up his thigh. He screamed again, a raw, animal noise, but the leg came loose. His ankle was twisted, maybe broken, but he could stand. He dragged himself out of the missing door, falling into the mud. The cold slush soaked his clothes instantly, shocking his system back to full alertness. He grabbed the canister. He looked back into the car for the laptop. It was gone, thrown from the vehicle during the spin. He saw it lying 10 feet away in a puddle. The screen shattered, sparks jumping from the motherboard. The data was gone. The localized copy was destroyed. All that was left was the canister, the physical proof. And him. Down here. A voice shouted from the ramp. A flashlight beam hit Elias, blinding him. "Contact. He's moving." Thwip. A bullet kicked up concrete inches from his foot. Elias scrambled up, ignoring the screaming protest of his ankle. He limped toward the darkness of the tunnel, away from the light, away from the ramp. This was an old service tunnel, part of the D.C. metro expansion that had been halted due to budget cuts. It was a labyrinth of shadows, rusted tracks, and dripping pipes. He ran, or rather hobbled, using the wall for support. His breath echoed in the confined space, loud and harsh. Every step was a battle. He could hear the heavy boots of the mercenaries hitting the concrete floor of the tunnel behind him. They were fast. They were fresh. He was a 50-year-old academic with a concussion and a bad leg. "Sarah," he wheezed. "Where are you?" He reached a junction in the tunnel. To the left, a dead end blocked by a collapse. To the right, a long stretch of track leading deeper under the city. He went right. The flashlight beams danced on the walls behind him, growing closer. Shadows stretched and warped, looking like monsters reaching out to grab him. He fumbled in his pocket for his phone. The screen was cracked, but it was still on. No signal. Deep underground, he was a ghost. He stumbled over a discarded railroad tie and fell hard, the canister clattering against the rail. He froze, terrified the noise had given him away. "Did you hear that?" A voice echoed. "Close. Too close.
Sector 4.
Flanking left. Elias curled into a ball behind a concrete support pillar. He checked the canister again. The seal held. He held it up to his face, staring at the label. Vax-Z. Lot 412. I'm sorry, he whispered to the empty air. He thought of his wife who had left him 2 years ago because he worked too much. He thought of the kids who would die if this didn't get out. I tried. He closed his eyes, listening to the footsteps. Splash, splash, splash. They were 20 yards away. 10 yards. Suddenly, a light flickered at the far end of the tunnel ahead of him. It wasn't the harsh, blue-white LED of a tactical light. It was warmer, a halogen floodlight. Elias squinted. A silhouette appeared in the glare. A figure standing on a maintenance platform about 50 yards down the track. Elias, the voice echoed, distorted by the acoustics, but he knew it. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Sarah, he screamed back, forcing himself up. The mercenaries heard it too. Target has support. Engage. Bullets began to chew up the darkness. Sparks flew from the iron tracks as rounds ricocheted wildly. Elias ducked his head and ran, throwing himself forward with the last reserves of his energy. He wasn't running toward safety. He was running toward the light. Get down. Sarah's voice boomed. Elias dove flat onto the wet gravel between the tracks just as a deafening roar filled the tunnel. Sarah wasn't alone. She had brought a flare. He watched from the ground as a brilliant red light arced over his head, thrown by the figure on the platform. The road flare hissed and sputtered, landing in the pool of water directly in front of the advancing mercenaries. The sudden burst of red light blinded them. Their night vision goggles would be washed out, useless for a few critical seconds. They shouted in confusion, firing blindly into the ceiling. Elias scrambled on his hands and knees, crawling toward the platform. He reached the base of the metal stairs and hauled himself up. Sarah was there, reaching down. She grabbed his jacket and pulled him up the last few steps, dragging him behind a heavy steel generator for cover. She looked different than he remembered, dressed in tactical cargo pants and a rain jacket, her hair tied back, holding a heavy-duty film camera in one hand and a portable uplink unit in the other. She looked like a war correspondent in a trench. "You look like hell, Elias," she said, her eyes scanning his bloodied face. "You look," Elias coughed, spitting out blood. "You look like an angel." He shoved the canister into her hands. "Here, the laptop is gone. The data is gone. This is it. This is everything." Sarah took the canister. She felt the weight of it. She looked at the label. Then she looked back at the tunnel. The mercenaries had recovered. The red flare was dying out. The beams of their flashlights were cutting through the smoke, focusing on the platform. "There's nowhere to go, Sarah," Elias said, slumping against the generator. "The exit behind you is sealed. Isn't it? That's why you're stopped here." Sarah nodded grimly. "Construction collapse. We're boxed in." "They'll kill us," Elias said, his voice strangely calm. "They can't let this leave the tunnel." Sarah looked at the canister, then at her camera. She checked the uplink unit strapped to her waist. The green light was blinking. Connected. "They can kill us?" Sarah said, a fierce, dangerous smile touching her lips. She flipped the switch on her camera rig. "But they can't kill the signal." She mounted the camera on top of the generator, pointing it down toward the tracks where the mercenaries were regrouping. Then she turned the lens around, facing herself and Elias. "Are you ready?" she asked. Elias wiped the blood from his eyes. He straightened his glasses, which were miraculously still on his face, though one lens was cracked. He looked at the red rec light. "I'm ready," he said. Sarah hit the button. "We are live," she shouted, her voice projecting down the tunnel toward the gunman. "Streaming to Facebook, YouTube, and every major news desk in the country." She grabbed the canister and held it up to the lens, the silver metal gleaming in the camera light. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. This is Dr. Elias Thorne of the CDC. And this," she tapped the canister. is the reason they are trying to kill us. Down on the tracks, the mercenaries froze. The lead man raised his hand, signaling a halt. He lowered his weapon slightly. He knew what a live stream meant. If he fired now, the muzzle flash would be seen by millions. If he killed them on camera, there was no cover-up. There was no spin. The standoff had begun. Elias looked into the black lens of the camera. He imagined the world on the other side. The parents sitting in their living rooms. The doctors in the hospitals. The executives in the boardrooms. He took a breath, and he began to speak. The red recording light on the camera was the brightest star in the universe. It pulsed with a steady, hypnotic rhythm, on, off, on, off. A digital heartbeat that connected the damp, rat-infested darkness of the unfinished subway tunnel to the living rooms of millions. Elias stared into the lens, his reflection warped in the glass. He saw a man he barely recognized. His face smeared with grease and blood, his glasses cracked, his tie torn loose, his eyes wide with the manic clarity of the condemned. He was shaking, not just from the adrenaline or the cold seeping into his bones, but from the sheer, crushing weight of the connection. Sarah had said every major platform. And in the silence that followed her declaration, Elias could almost feel the invisible eyes of the world blinking open, turning their gaze upon him. Down on the tracks, 10 yards away, the mercenaries were statues carved from shadow. The lead operative had lowered his submachine gun, the barrel pointing at the gravel, but his finger hovered over the trigger guard. He was caught in a tactical paradox. His orders were to eliminate the asset and secure the sample, but his training told him that executing a federal scientist on a live broadcast was a suicide mission that no amount of hazard pay could cover. The red flare Sarah had thrown was dying, sputtering in the puddle, casting long, dancing shadows that made the gunmen look like demons debating their next move. "Keep the camera on them," Elias whispered, his voice cracking. "If you turn it away, they'll kill us." "I know," Sarah murmured, her hands steady on the rig, her eyes locked on the small monitor attached to the side. "We have 50,000 viewers. 60,000. It's climbing by the second, Elias. Talk, now." Elias swallowed the taste of copper and ash in his mouth. He leaned closer to the lens, clutching the silver canister like a holy relic. "My name is Dr. Elias Thorne," he began, his voice gaining strength, projecting over the hum of the portable generator Sarah was using for cover. "I am the senior virologist for the viral pathogens branch at the CDC. The time is..." He glanced at his broken watch. 4:18 a.m. "If you are watching this, you are witnessing a crime in progress. But the crime isn't what I've done. It's what I'm trying to stop." He held the canister up higher. The label Vax-Z, Lot 412, caught the harsh light of the camera mount. "This is the Vax-Z influenza vaccine. The same vaccine scheduled to be shipped to pediatric centers across the United States on Monday morning. The same vaccine the FDA approved under emergency use authorization 48 hours ago. They told you it was safe. They told you it was a miracle." Elias paused, breathing hard. He saw the lead mercenary tap his earpiece, listening to a voice that was screaming instructions from somewhere safe and dry. The gunman took a step forward. "Stay back," Sarah yelled, panning the camera violently to frame the gunman's face. "The world is watching you." Waved to the camera. The mercenary recoiled, ducking his head away from the light, retreating back into the gloom. The power of anonymity was his armor, and Sarah was stripping it away pixel by pixel. Elias turned back to the lens. "They lied. I ran the simulations myself. I accessed the raw data that Ethelgard Pharmaceuticals hid from the public review board. This specific lot, and the synthetic protein structure used in the mass production, contains a variance. Fatal flaw. He needed to be precise. He needed to be the scientist, not the fugitive. The spike protein in this vaccine does not dissolve after the immune response. In children under the age of 12, due to specific metabolic alkalinity, the protein crystallizes. It accumulates in the heart muscle, causes acute myocarditis, heart failure." He let the words hang in the air. "Heart failure." The mortality rate in my simulations is 3%, Elias said, tears mixing with the rain on his face. That sounds like a small number, doesn't it? Just a statistic. But do the math. 50 million doses. That is 1.7 million children. Imagine a stadium filled with children. Now imagine it empty. That is what they are selling you on Monday. On the small monitor attached to the camera, a waterfall of comments was cascading down the side of the screen. It was moving so fast it was a blur of text. Emojis of shock, angry demands for proof, accusations of conspiracy, and terrified parents tagging news outlets. The viewer count ticked over 200,000. The algorithm had caught fire. The signal was being boosted, shared, retweeted, and restreamed by influencers and independent journalists across the globe. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine pierced the air. "Jammer," Sarah hissed. "They're trying to kill the signal." The video feed on the monitor glitched, pixelating into blocks of green and purple. The audio screeched. The mercenaries were adapting. If they couldn't shoot the messenger, they would blind the audience. "Don't let them cut it," Elias shouted, panic surging again. "I'm switching to the satellite uplift," Sarah said, her fingers flying across the controls of the heavy unit strapped to her waist. "It's slower but harder to jam. Keep talking, Elias. Don't stop." The feed stabilized, grainy and low resolution now, looking like a transmission from a war zone, which, in a way, it was. This gritty aesthetic only made it feel more real, more terrified, more urgent. "They are trying to silence us," Elias said, leaning into the lens, his face filling the frame. "The men behind me work for Ethelgard. They killed a security guard at the CDC tonight. His name was Paul. He had 2 daughters. They tried to kill me on the highway. Look at my car." Sarah panned the camera quickly to the wreckage of the sedan at the bottom of the ramp, smoke still curling from the engine, the bullet holes in the side clearly visible in the gloom. "This isn't a theory," Elias screamed, his voice raw. "This is a cover-up worth $5 billion. I am begging you, do not take this vaccine. Demand an independent inquiry. Demand to see the data on Protocol 412. Down on the tracks, the lead mercenary had seemingly received his final orders. He signaled to his team. They weren't raising their rifles. They were reaching for their belts. "Gas," the mercenary commanded. "Flush them out." 3 black canisters arced through the air, clattering onto the metal platform. "Masks," Sarah yelled, pulling the collar of her jacket up over her nose. She didn't have masks. Neither did Elias. His white smoke erupted from the canisters, thick and acrid. It wasn't lethal gas, they still needed to recover the sample intact. But it was CS gas, a potent tear gas designed to incapacitate instantly. The cloud engulfed them. Elias felt his throat close up. His eyes burned as if someone had thrown acid into them. He coughed violently, doubling over, clutching the silver vial to his chest. "Keep filming." He wheezed, falling to his knees. Sarah was coughing too, her eyes streaming tears, but she didn't drop the camera. She lowered it to the ground, angling it upward so it captured the scene. Elias on his knees in the swirling white fog, holding the vaccine like a shield, while dark shapes in gas masks moved up the stairs toward them. It was a tableau of martyrdom. "Get the sample," a voice barked from the smoke. A gloved hand reached out of the fog, grabbing Elias's shoulder. He thrashed, swinging the heavy canister, striking the mercenary in the helmet. The man grunted but didn't let go. He struck Elias across the face with the butt of a pistol. Elias saw stars again. He fell backward, the taste of blood overwhelming. The mercenary straddled him, wrenching the canister from his grip. "No!" Elias screamed, a gurgling sound. "Don't let them." "Secure," the mercenary said, holding the silver tube up. "Cut the feed. Smash the camera." Another figure loomed over Sarah. She kicked out, catching the man in the shin, but he backhanded her, sending her sprawling against the generator. He raised his boot to stomp on the camera lens. But the camera was still rolling, and the world was still watching. Before the boot could come down, A sound thundered from the tunnel entrance above. A sound louder than the gas hiss, louder than the screams. Boom! The metal barricades at the top of the ramp exploded inward. Floodlights, blinding, heavenly white floodlights, poured down into the pit, cutting through the tear gas like lasers. Federal agents, drop your weapons. The voice was amplified, godlike, echoing off the tunnel walls. FBI, down on the ground. Now, dozens of figures in tactical gear, marked with yellow FBI letters on their backs, swarmed down the ramp and repelled from the openings above. They moved with the overwhelming force of a tidal wave. The Ethelgard mercenaries froze. They were private contractors, bullies with guns, but they weren't suicidal. They knew the difference between a cleanup job and a federal siege. The lead mercenary looked at the canister in his hand, then at the 20 rifles pointed at his chest from the high ground. He dropped the canister. It rolled across the metal grate, coming to rest next to Elias's hand. Hands in the air, the mercenaries dropped their weapons, kneeling in the white fog, hands behind their heads. Elias lay on his back, gasping for air, his vision tunneling. He saw boots rushing past him. He felt hands checking his pulse, patting him down. Subject is secure. We need a medic. Get the hazmat team for the canister. A face appeared above him. A woman in an FBI windbreaker, her face stern but not unkind. She pulled a radio from her vest. Director, we have them. The broadcast is still active. She looked directly into the camera lens, which was still running, still broadcasting the view of the defeated mercenaries and the rescued scientist from the floor angle. She reached out and, with a decisive click, covered the lens with her hand. The screen went black. The transition from the tunnel to the back of the ambulance was a blur of disjointed sensory inputs. The sharp prick of a needle as a paramedic administered a sedative. The cool sensation of an oxygen mask over his face. The flashing lights of 100 police cars reflecting off the wet pavement of 4th Street. Elias sat on the edge of the ambulance bumper, a thermal blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He was shivering uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical blow. The tear gas still stung his eyes, making the world look soft and hazy. Sarah was in the ambulance next to him, a paramedic tending to the cut on her cheek. She was holding her phone, scrolling with a frantic intensity. Elias, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Look, she held the screen up to him. It was Twitter. The top trending hashtag worldwide was hashtag protocol 412. The second was hashtag save the children. The third was hashtag Ethelgard. The stock market hasn't even opened yet, Sarah said, a grim smile touching her lips. And Ethelgard has already lost 40% of its value in after-hours trading. The FDA just issued a statement. They're pausing the shipment. Elias looked at the screen, but the words swam before his eyes. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt hollowed out. It's not over, he murmured, pulling the blanket tighter. Vance is still out there. The people who ordered this. They aren't the ones in handcuffs down there. A man in a cheap suit approached the ambulance. He flashed a badge that didn't look like an FBI badge. It looked older, heavier. Dr. Thorne? Ms. Jenkins? The man said. His voice was nondescript, the voice of a bureaucrat who buried secrets for a living. I'm Special Agent Miller. You're being placed in protective custody. For your own safety. Am I under arrest? Elias asked, looking up. Let's just say you're a person of significant interest, Miller said, his eyes scanning the perimeter as if he expected another attack. We need to get you underground. Real underground. The media is swarming the perimeter, and Ethelgard has lawyers landing in D.C. as we speak. This war is just moving from the streets to the courtroom. Elias looked at Sarah. She nodded slowly. They both knew the truth. The chase was over, but the siege had just begun. The canister, Elias said. Where is it? It's being transported to a secure federal lab for analysis, Miller said. Chain of custody is being established. Don't let them swap it, Elias warned, a flash of his old fire returning. Don't let it out of your sight. Miller smiled, a thin, humorless expression. Dr. Thorne, after what you just did, the whole world is watching that canister. If we lose it, the country burns. Get in the van. Elias stood up. His legs were weak, but he walked under his own power. He climbed into the back of the armored black van. Sarah followed, sitting opposite him. The doors slammed shut, sealing them in darkness once again. As the van began to move, winding its way through the chaos of the flashing lights and the screaming reporters, Elias leaned his head back against the cold metal wall. He closed his eyes. He could still see the red light of the camera. He could still hear the silence of the lab. He had started the fire. Now he had to survive the burn. The concept of safety was a relative term, a variable dependent entirely on who held the keys. For the last 20 years, Dr. Elias Thorne had found safety in the predictable, sterile embrace of the laboratory, in the immutable laws of biology and physics. But as he sat in the center of the interrogation room, the stark white walls pressing in on him like the sides of a closing coffin, he realized that safety was no longer a state of being. It was a negotiation. The facility they had brought him to was technically a safe house, an FBI annex buried beneath a nondescript office building in Northern Virginia. To Elias, it felt like a tomb. There were no windows, only the ceaseless, low-frequency hum of the air filtration system, a sound that reminded him, with cruel irony, of the lab he had fled only hours ago. They had taken his clothes, his broken glasses, and his phone, replacing them with a gray jumpsuit and a pair of cheap plastic reading glasses that pinched the bridge of his nose. He had been sitting at the stainless steel table for 3 hours. No one had spoken to him. No one had offered him water. It was the standard isolation tactic. Let the adrenaline fade, let the exhaustion set in, let the subjects stew in their own terror until the silence became so loud they would say anything just to break it. Elias stared at the two-way mirror on the far wall. He saw his own reflection, haggard, pale, a bruise blooming across his cheekbone where the mercenary had struck him. He looked like a criminal. He looked like a madman. Perhaps that was the point. The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. Special Agent Miller walked in, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and a thick manila folder. He didn't look like the cavalry anymore. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, his face was drawn, his eyes hard and calculating. He didn't sit down. He placed 1 cup in front of Elias and leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "Drink," Miller said. "It's terrible, but it's hot." Elias didn't touch the cup. "Where is Sarah?" "Ms. Jenkins is being processed in Wing B," Miller replied, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "She's facing a litany of federal charges: espionage, unauthorized transmission of classified data, reckless endangerment. The Bureau is not fond of people who use unauthorized uplinks to broadcast sensitive operations." "She's a journalist," Elias said, his voice raspy. "She's protected by the First Amendment. She's a co-conspirator in the theft of government property," Miller corrected him. "And right now, she's the only friend you have, which is why you're going to help us help her." Miller slid the folder across the table. Elias opened it. It wasn't a legal brief. It was a printout of social media analytics, news headlines, and stock market tickers. Ethelgard stock plummets 45%. Riots reported at distribution centers. White House calls for calm. "You wanted to make a splash, Doctor?" Miller said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Congratulations. You flooded the world. There are parents storming pediatric clinics in Ohio demanding medical records. There are mobs burning Ethelgard signs in Seattle. The president is on the phone with the Joint Chiefs because we have a national security crisis on our hands. The economy is teetering." "I told the truth," Elias said, looking up at Miller. "The vaccine is poison. I saved lives." "You caused panic?" Miller snapped, his facade of calm cracking for a second. "And panic kills people too, Elias. Car accidents, trampled crowds, heart attacks from stress. You think you're a hero? You're an arsonist." The door opened again. This time a woman entered. She was dressed in a sharp navy suit that cost more than Elias's car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she carried herself with the terrifying authority of someone who whispered in the ears of powerful men. "Agent Miller, thank you. I'll take it from here," she said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. Miller hesitated, glancing at Elias, then nodded and left the room. The door clicked shut, the lock engaging with a heavy thud. The woman sat down opposite Elias. She didn't offer a name. She simply placed a digital recorder on the table and pressed a button. "Dr. Thorne," she began. "I am Deputy Attorney General Vance. No relation to your former boss, I assure you. Just an unfortunate coincidence." She offered a thin, shark-like smile. "I represent the interests of the United States government in matters of domestic stability." "Where is the sample?" Elias asked. "Sample 412. The canister. It needs to be tested by an independent lab. Not the FDA. Not the CDC. The sample is in a secure biocontainment facility at Fort Detrick," the woman said. "It is being analyzed as we speak." "By whom?" "By top men," she said dismissively. "But we aren't here to talk about chemistry, doctor. We are here to talk about optics. You see, the narrative you've created, the rogue scientist saving the world, is very compelling. But it's also very dangerous. It undermines faith in public health institutions. It undermines faith in the government. The government approved a lethal drug because of a lobbyist check." Elias shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The woman didn't flinch. She opened a notebook. "Here is the situation, Elias. We cannot have a trial where you get on a soapbox and accuse the FDA of corruption. It would destabilize the administration. So we have an alternative." She slid a document toward him. It was a plea deal. "You will recant your statement regarding malicious intent. You will state that your findings were preliminary and that in your exhaustion and mental state, you panicked. You will say that you stole the sample out of a misguided sense of duty, but that you now understand the protocols were being followed." Elias read the document, his eyes widening. "You want me to say I was wrong? To say I'm crazy? In exchange," she continued, "we will drop the charges of treason and bioterrorism. You will plead guilty to mishandling classified material. You'll do 2 years in a minimum security federal camp. Ms. Jenkins will walk away with a fine and probation. Ethelgard will quietly recall the vaccine citing manufacturing inconsistencies. No one goes to jail for murder. The system saves face. You get your life back eventually. And if I refuse?" Elias asked, his blood turning to ice. The woman closed the folder. "If you refuse, we proceed with the treason charge. We will paint you as a mentally unstable radical with a history of paranoia. We will dig up your divorce, your therapy records, your debts. And the sample?" She leaned in closer. "Samples are fragile, Elias. Sometimes they get contaminated. Sometimes they break. If that sample tests negative for the toxin you claim is there, then you aren't a whistleblower. You're just a terrorist who caused a panic for no reason. And you will never see the sun again." Elias stared at her. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They were going to switch the sample. He knew it. If he didn't take the deal, they would ensure the evidence disappeared, and he would be buried under the weight of the lie. "I want to see Sarah," Elias said quietly. "Sign the paper and you can see her," the woman said, holding out a pen. Elias took the pen. His hand was trembling. He looked at the paper, then at the mirror. He thought about the letter Sarah had read to him in the ambulance, the mother from Ohio. He thought about the mercenaries in the tunnel. He put the pen down. "No," Elias said. The woman's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened. "I don't think you understand the gravity of your position." "I understand perfectly," Elias said, leaning back. "You're scared. If you had the sample and if it was clean, you wouldn't be offering me a deal. You'd be parading me in front of the press as a lunatic. The fact that you're here in this room, offering me 2 years instead of life, means the sample is real, and you can't make it disappear because too many people saw it." Sarah live-streamed the handover to the FBI. The chain of custody is public record. He leaned forward. "I know how the bureaucracy works. You can't just swap it if the agents who booked it are honest. And I bet Miller booked it by the book before you got your claws into him. The woman stood up abruptly. She snatched the folder off the table. You're making a mistake, Dr. Thorne. Fatal one. The only mistake I made, Elias said, was trusting the system in the first place. She turned and walked to the door. Enjoy the silence, Doctor. It's going to get much louder soon. The door slammed shut. Elias was alone again. But now the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the ticking clock of a war he had just declared. Scene 2, the loophole. 3 floors above, in a holding cell that looked suspiciously like a converted file room, Sarah Jenkins was pacing. They had taken her camera, her phone, and her uplink unit. They had even taken her shoelaces. But they hadn't taken her mind. Sarah was a journalist of the old school, the kind who dug through trash cans and read redacted FOIA requests for fun. She knew that in every cover-up, there was a leak. In every fortress, there was a crack. She stopped pacing and looked at the single object in the room besides the metal bench. An old, wall-mounted television encased in plexiglass, currently turned off. She walked over to the door and pressed her ear against the cold steel. She could hear muffled voices. Director wants a total media blackout. Lawyers are asking for access. Get the IT guys to scrub the cloud. She might have backups. Sarah smiled grimly. She retreated to the bench and sat down. They were looking for the cloud backups. They were looking for the digital footprint. They didn't know about the dead man's switch. She had configured her server years ago, after a story on the cartel nearly got her killed. If she didn't log in and enter a specific 64-character key every 24 hours, her system automatically emailed her entire encrypted archive to 5 major international news outlets: The Guardian, Le Monde, Der Spiegel, Al Jazeera, and the Associated Press. It had been 12 hours since her last login. They had 12 hours before the raw, unedited footage of the tunnel, including the audio of the mercenaries receiving orders to clean the asset, went global. Not just the live stream, but the high-res local files she had cached. She needed to wait, but she also needed to know if Elias was holding up. She knew him. He was brilliant, but he was brittle. He wasn't built for this kind of pressure. The door to her cell opened. It wasn't Miller. It was a young agent looking nervous. He held a tray of food. "Lunch?" he mumbled, not making eye contact. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, standing up. "Officer Davis." "Davis," Sarah said, stepping closer. "Do you have kids?" "Ma'am, I can't talk to you." "I have a nephew," Sarah said, ignoring him. "He's 7. He loves dinosaurs. He was supposed to get a flu shot on Monday. Vax-Z." Davis froze. The tray rattled slightly in his hands. "You saw the stream, didn't you?" Sarah pressed. "You saw what Dr. Thorne said. 3.4%, Davis. That's 1 in 30. If your kid's class has 30 kids, one of them doesn't come home. That's just allegations." Davis stammered, but his eyes betrayed him. He was terrified. "It's not allegations. It's math," Sarah said. "And the people running this place? They are trying to bury the math. If they bury it, the shots go out next week. Maybe not Vax-Z, maybe they rebrand it. But they won't stop." She moved closer to the bars of the inner cell door. "I don't need you to let me out, Davis. I just need you to tell me one thing. Is Dr. Thorne safe?" Davis looked at the camera in the corner of the ceiling, then back at Sarah. He whispered, barely audible. "They moved him. He's not in interrogation anymore." "Moved him where?" "The medical wing. They said he needed a psychiatric evaluation." Sarah's blood ran cold. Psychiatric evaluation. That was code for drugging him. If they pumped him full of antipsychotics, he would look deranged in court. Or worse, they could stage a suicide. Guilt over the hoax he created. "Davis," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "You need to get a message to Agent Miller, the older agent, the one who brought us in." "Miller?" Davis shook his head. "Miller is gone. He was relieved of duty an hour ago. Suspended pending investigation. Miller was out. The fix was fully in. They were alone. Scene 3, the medical wing. Elias was strapped to a gurney. The leather restraints were tight, digging into his wrists. The room smelled of rubbing alcohol and ozone. It was a hospital room, but there were no windows, and the door had a heavy electronic lock. A doctor stood over him. He wasn't wearing a name tag. He was filling a syringe from a small vial. "Dr. Thorne," the doctor said, his voice monotone. "Your pulse is elevated. BP is 160/90. You're suffering from acute stress reaction, paranoia, delusions of persecution." "I am not delusional," Elias said, struggling against the straps. "I am a political prisoner. You cannot medicate me without my consent." "This is an emergency override," the doctor said, tapping the syringe. "For your own safety, we need to stabilize you before your debriefing continues." "What is that?" Elias eyed the clear liquid. "Haloperidol? Thorazine? Just a mild sedative. To help you sleep." Elias knew better. If they knocked him out now, he would miss the critical window. The media cycle was moving fast. If he disappeared for 48 hours, the narrative would cement without him. "You're violating the Hippocratic Oath." Elias spat. "I'm following orders," the doctor said. He moved closer. "Relax your arm." Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. The electronic lock on the door beeped. A long, angry error tone. Beep. The door slid open. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't Miller. It was a man in a janitor's uniform, pushing a mop bucket. He looked down at the floor, keeping his cap pulled low. The doctor turned around, annoyed. "This room is occupied. Get out." The janitor looked up. It was the mercenary driver from the SUV. The one with the dead eyes. Elias gasped. Ethelgard hadn't just sent lawyers. They had sent the cleanup crew inside the FBI. The mercenary didn't speak. He pulled a suppressed pistol from the mop bucket. But the doctor dropped, a neat hole in his forehead. He didn't even have time to look surprised. The syringe clattered to the floor. Elias stared in horror. The mercenary stepped over the doctor's body and walked toward the gurney. He wasn't here to rescue Elias. He was here to finish the job the tunnel crash had failed to do. "Suicide?" the mercenary muttered, almost to himself. "Tragic. Overdose on sedatives." He holstered the gun and picked up the syringe from the floor. He looked at Elias with zero emotion. "Hold still," document Elias thrashed, pulling at the leather straps with all his strength. "Help! Security! Soundproof!" the mercenary said calmly. He grabbed Elias's arm, finding the vein. Elias watched the needle descend. This was it, the quiet end. No explosion, no speech. Just a needle in a windowless room. Bang! The room shook. The mercenary jerked forward, the needle flying from his hand. He stumbled, clutching his shoulder, blood spraying onto Elias's gray jumpsuit. Standing in the doorway, holding a smoking service revolver, was Agent Miller. He looked terrible. His shirt was untucked, his badge was missing, and he was bleeding from a cut on his head. But his aim was true. "Step away from him," Miller shouted, advancing into the room. The mercenary, wounded but not down, spun around, reaching for his gun. Miller fired again. Bang! The shot hit the mercenary in the chest. The man collapsed backward, crashing into the medical supply cart, bottles shattering around him. Miller didn't check the body. He rushed to the gurney, holstering his weapon and fumbling for a knife in his pocket. He began slashing the leather straps. "Miller!" Elias stammered, his heart hammering against his ribs. They said you were suspended." "I was," Miller grunted, cutting the last strap. "And I don't like being suspended while assassins walk into my building using stolen credentials." Elias sat up, rubbing his wrists. "How did you know?" "I didn't," Miller said, pulling Elias off the bed. "But I checked the visitor logs. A consultant from Ethelgard checked in 10 minutes ago. Richard Vance. Vance is here? He's upstairs, with the Deputy Attorney General. They're rewriting the official report. But this guy..." Miller kicked the dead mercenary's boot. "This guy was the insurance policy." Miller handed Elias the dead doctor's lab coat. Put this on. We need to move. Move where? Elias asked, putting on the coat. There's nowhere to go. They control the exits. We're not leaving, Miller said, a hard glint in his eyes. We're going up. To the conference room. Why? Because, Miller said, checking the cylinder of his revolver. The sample arrived at Fort Detrick 20 minutes ago, but the authorization to test it has been delayed by the AG's office. They're stalling until you're dead. Miller looked at Elias. You wanted to confront Vance? Now is your chance. But we have to get past a building full of federal agents who think I'm a rogue element. And Sarah? I unlocked her cell on the way down. If she's as smart as you say, she's already heading for the server room. Elias took a deep breath. The fear was still there, but it was different now. It was cold, focused. He looked at the dead mercenary, then at the dead doctor. The system had tried to eat him whole. Lead the way, Elias said. Scene 4, the boardroom. On the top floor of the secure facility, the conference room was a sanctuary of wood paneling and soft lighting. A stark contrast to the concrete hell below. Richard Vance stood by the window, looking out at the rain-swept parking lot. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch. Behind him, the Deputy Attorney General, DAG, was on the phone. Yes, Mr. President. The situation is contained. Dr. Thorne is undergoing treatment. We expect a statement within the hour. She hung up and looked at Vance. You're cutting it close, Richard. If the press gets wind that Thorne is dead. He won't be dead, Vance said smoothly, turning around. He will be sedated, incapacitated. By the time he wakes up, the independent test will have concluded that the sample was degraded due to improper storage by Dr. Thorne himself. Inconclusive results. The vaccine recall will be framed as a precautionary measure. Ethelgard takes a stock hit, but we survive. The contract remains. And the mercenary? He's a ghost. If he gets caught, he doesn't know my name. The elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged. Vance frowned. I thought you locked down the floor. The DAG looked confused. I did. The doors slid open. Elias Thorne stepped out. He was wearing a blood-spattered lab coat. His hair wild, looking like a revenant returned from the grave. Behind him, Miller held his gun at the low ready, scanning the hallway. Richard, Elias said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a calm, scientific observation. You look surprised. Vance dropped his glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the scotch staining the expensive rug. Security, the DAG screamed, reaching for the panic button on the table. Don't bother, Miller said, stepping into the room and leveling his gun at the DAG. I jammed the localized comms, and your security detail is currently dealing with a fire alarm in the basement. Ms. Jenkins has a flair for the dramatic. Elias walked into the room. He didn't look at the gun. He looked straight at Vance. It's over, Richard, Elias said. The sample is at Detrick. But you know that. What you don't know is that I didn't just take one sample. Vance's eyes narrowed. You're lying. Inventory showed only one vial missing. I took one vial, Elias corrected him. But I swabbed the interior of the cryogenic freezer. The residue, it's on this. Elias reached into his pocket. He pulled out a handkerchief, a dirty, crumpled handkerchief he had used to wipe the blood from his head earlier. It was a bluff, a total desperate bluff. This cloth, Elias lied, holding it up like a talisman, contains enough particulate matter for mass spectrometry, and unlike the vial which you can claim was tampered with, this has been on my person the entire time. Miller has witnessed the chain of custody. Vance stared at the cloth. He was a bureaucrat, not a scientist. He didn't know if residue on a cloth would be enough. But the doubt was there. The fear. You can't prove anything? Vance sneered, though his voice wavered. I don't have to, Elias said, because Sarah just uploaded the audio from the tunnel. The part where your men asked for permission to clean the asset. And the part where you confirmed it. Vance went pale. What? The dead man's switch, Elias said. improvising based on what he knew of Sarah. She didn't just stream. She recorded. And 5 minutes ago, her server unlocked. As if on cue, the DAG's phone began to ring. Then her tablet buzzed. Then the TV screen on the wall flickered from the generic government seal to CNN. Breaking news. Leaked audio reveals assassination order on CDC whistleblower. The audio played. It was grainy, but unmistakable. Clear to engage. Eliminate the carrier. The DAG looked at the TV, then at Vance. She slowly backed away from him. I didn't authorize that, she whispered. I was told this was a containment op, you lying bee. Vance lunged at her. Miller stepped forward and pistol-whipped Vance across the jaw. The director crumbled to the floor, unconscious. Elias stood over him. He felt exhausted. He felt old. But he also felt clean. The DAG looked at Elias, her hands raised. Dr. Thorne, we can work this out. I can grant you immunity. Right now. Elias looked at her. He took off the bloodied lab coat and dropped it on Vance's unconscious body. I don't want immunity, Elias said. I want a lawyer, and I want to call the mother in Ohio. The sound of the gavel striking the mahogany block was not the thunderclap Elias Thorne had expected. It was a sharp, dry crack, like a dead branch snapping in a winter forest, and it signaled the end of the noise that had consumed his life for the past 6 months. The Senate hearing room, a cavernous chamber of marble and history, finally exhaled. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the shifting of papers, the soft clicks of camera shutters, and the collective breath of the 200 people packed into the gallery. Elias sat at the witness table, his hands folded on the green felt surface. He looked older. The gray in his beard had conquered the black, and the lines around his eyes were etched deeper, permanent maps of the sleepless nights he had endured in protective custody. He wasn't wearing the blood-spattered lab coat anymore, nor the ill-fitting gray jumpsuit of the Federal Detention Center. He wore a simple navy suit, one that hung slightly loose on his frame, a testament to the weight he had lost since the night in the tunnel. Dr. Thorne, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, said, leaning into his microphone. His voice boomed through the room, amplified but lacking the hostility it had held in the opening sessions weeks ago. This committee has reviewed the independent findings from the Department of Defense, the European Medicines Agency, and the recovered data from the server of Ms. Sarah Jenkins. The evidence is irrefutable. Elias didn't smile. He didn't feel the rush of victory. He just nodded, a small, tired movement. To his right, Sarah sat with her legal team. She looked fierce, her pen scratching furiously on a notepad. But when she caught his eye, her expression softened. She offered him a barely perceptible wink, a ghost of the adrenaline-fueled bond they had forged in the dark. The committee acknowledges, the chairman continued, looking over his spectacles at the cameras, that while Dr. Thorne's methods were unorthodox, and indeed illegal under Title 18, his actions prevented a catastrophic loss of life. We are, therefore, recommending a full presidential pardon for all charges related to the theft of government property and unauthorized distribution of classified material. A ripple went through the room. Pardon. It was the golden ticket. It meant freedom. It meant he wasn't going to prison. However, the chairman added, his voice dropping an octave, this committee also recommends that Dr. Thorne's security clearance be permanently revoked. You are a hero, doctor, but you are a dangerous one. The CDC cannot employ a man who decides which laws to follow. Elias leaned into his own microphone. The feedback whined for a split second before settling. I understand, Senator, he said, his voice steady, echoing in the quiet room. I didn't do it to keep my job. I did it so there would be children left to grow up and take it. The chairman nodded, a moment of genuine respect passing between the politician and the scientist. This hearing is adjourned. As the room erupted into chaos, reporters shouting questions, lawyers packing briefcases, the gallery rising to its feet, Elias remained seated for a moment. He looked across the aisle to the defendant's table. Richard Vance sat there. The former director of the CDC division looked shrunken. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing the orange jumpsuit of the D.C. Central Detention Facility. He was flanked by U.S. Marshals. His wrists were shackled to his waist. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at his lawyers. He looked directly at Elias. There was no hatred in Vance's eyes anymore. Just a hollow, terrifying emptiness. The look of a man who had gambled his soul for a seat at the table, only to find the table had been burned to ash. Vance had pleaded guilty 3 days ago to conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to attempted murder. He was facing 20 years. The CEO of Ethelgard had already fled to a non-extradition country, leaving Vance to take the fall alone. It was the way of the world. The kings escaped, and the knights died in the mud. Elias stood up, turning his back on Vance. He walked through the parting crowd, ignoring the microphones thrust into his face. "Dr. Thorne, how does it feel? Dr. Thorne, will you sue the FDA? Elias, look this way." He pushed through the heavy oak doors and out into the corridor. The air in the hallway was cooler, smelling of floor wax and old paper. Waiting for him by a marble column was a man in a windbreaker, holding a cane. Miller. The former agent looked better than he had in the hospital wing, though he walked with a permanent limp now, a souvenir from a bullet fragment lodged near his hip. He wasn't FBI anymore. He had taken an early retirement package, a polite way of saying the Bureau wanted him gone but didn't want the PR nightmare of firing the man who saved the whistleblower. "You handled yourself well in there," Miller said, his voice gravelly. "Better than I would have. I probably would have told the senator to shove his recommendation." Elias managed a weak smile. "I think I've caused enough trouble for one lifetime, Agent Miller." "Just Miller now," the man corrected. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He handed it to Elias. Elias opened it. Inside was his old ID badge from the CDC. It was deactivated, a useless piece of plastic, but it was his. "Found it in evidence," Miller said. "Thought you might want a souvenir, or something to burn." Elias ran his thumb over his own photo, a younger, more naive version of himself. "Thank you, Miller, for everything. You lost your career because of me." Miller shrugged, looking out the window at the gray DC sky. "I didn't lose anything I wanted to keep. I spent 30 years following orders. It was nice for once to just follow my gut. Besides," he smirked, "Sarah got me a book deal. The agent who went rogue. It pays better than the pension." They shook hands. It was a firm grip, the handshake of two men who had seen the other side of the veil and come back. Miller turned and walked away, the tap-tap-tap of his cane fading down the long hallway. Elias walked out of the Capitol building and down the wide stone steps. It was November now. The air was crisp, biting at his exposed skin. The leaves on the National Mall were turning gold and crimson, a fire that didn't burn. Sarah was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. She was smoking a cigarette, a habit she claimed she had quit years ago but had picked up again in the safe house. She exhaled a plume of smoke into the cold air, watching him approach. "So," she said, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under her boot. "Unemployed, disgraced, and officially a national security risk. How's it feel to be free?" "Terrifying," Elias admitted. He looked at her. She looked tired, too. The Pulitzer Prize she had won last month for the 412 Protocol series sat on a shelf in her apartment, but it hadn't fixed the dark circles under her eyes. She still checked over her shoulder every time a car backfired. They both did. "I have something for you," Sarah said. She reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "It's not a subpoena." Elias took it. "What is it?" "It's the settlement," Sarah said, "from the class action lawsuit against Ethelgard. The lawyers finalized it this morning. They set aside a portion for the whistleblower fund. A lot of money, Elias. Enough to disappear. Enough to go to Fiji and never look at a microscope again." Elias weighed the envelope in his hand. Felt heavy, but not in the way the canister had. Felt like sorry money. Blood money that had been washed clean by lawyers. "I don't want to go to Fiji," Elias said quietly. What do you want to do? Sarah asked. You can't go back to the lab. No university will touch you. You're radioactive. I know, Elias said. He looked out across the mall, toward the Washington Monument standing stark against the clouds. I was thinking about teaching. High school, maybe. Somewhere small. Somewhere they don't care about security clearances, just chemistry. Sarah laughed. A genuine, bright sound that cut through the gloom. Mr. Thorne, the chemistry teacher. God help those kids. You'll be failing them for not calibrating their pipettes correctly. It's a start, Elias said. Come on, Sarah said, linking her arm through his. Let's get a drink. I know a place that doesn't have TVs. I don't want to see my face on the news again today. They walked together along the gravel path, the fallen leaves crunching under their feet. They didn't talk about the tunnel or the gas or the dead doctor in the medical wing. Those ghosts walked with them, silent companions, but they didn't need to be acknowledged. Not today. As they reached the edge of the park, Elias stopped. To his right, there was a playground. It was busy, despite the chill in the air. Parents sat on benches, wrapped in scarves, clutching coffees, watching their children. There was a group of kids, maybe 6 or 7 years old, playing tag. They were running, screaming, laughing with that lung-bursting intensity that only children possess. They were oblivious to the politics, the stock markets, the hearings. They didn't know that 3 months ago, men in suits had sat in a boardroom and decided their lives were worth less than a quarterly earnings report. Elias watched a little boy in a red jacket climb to the top of the slide. The boy paused at the top, looking out over his kingdom. His cheeks flushed pink with health and cold. He beat his chest like a gorilla and slid down, shrieking with joy. Elias felt a tightness in his throat. He touched the spot on his chest where he had held the canister that night. The bruise had faded, but the memory of the cold metal against his ribs was still there. You see them? Sarah asked softly, following his gaze. Yeah, Elias whispered. They don't know, Sarah said. They'll never know who you are. They'll never know what you did. You're just a guy in a suit looking at a playground. Good, Elias said, and he meant it. That was the burden of the inoculation. The patient doesn't remember the needle. They only enjoy the immunity. The fever breaks, the pain fades, and life continues, vibrant and messy and beautiful. The scar is left only on the one who administered the cure. Elias watched the boy in the red jacket run back to his mother. She scooped him up, hugging him tight, kissing his forehead. It was a simple, everyday miracle. A heart beating strong and steady. A rhythm that hadn't been broken by a crystallized protein. For the first time in 6 months, the knot in Elias's stomach loosened. The phantom noise of the siren faded. Are you okay? Sarah asked, squeezing his arm. Elias took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. He looked at the playground, then at the Capitol dome in the distance, and finally at Sarah. I lost my career, Elias said, his voice firm. I lost my reputation. I lost my marriage. I lost my peace of mind. He looked back at the boy in the red jacket, who was now chasing a squirrel near the oak tree. But the math, Elias smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. The math finally works out. He turned away from the playground, buttoning his jacket against the wind. Let's go get that drink, he said. They walked away, 2 small figures against the backdrop of a city that was slowly healing from a sickness it barely knew it had. Behind them, the sound of children's laughter rose into the air, louder than the gavels, louder than the sirens, louder than the lies. It was the sound of the future, and it was enough.